Good morning, everybody. Pat Doyle is my name. I'm the president of the Irish Council for Social Housing, and you're very welcome to our biannual conference. We're so excited today. We've over 500 delegates will be joining us over the next 3 days. We've a range of fabulous speakers and chairs from across the sector, across the voluntary sector, the non-for-profit, the approved housing bodies, the state and internationally. We're really proud here in the Irish Council for Social Housing to be putting on another conference. Unfortunately, in some ways, it's virtual, but next year and the year after, we'll be back. We're still delighted, though, that we've managed to keep our main sponsor with us today, AIB. They have stayed with us right throughout the pandemic, and we're very proud of the relationship with AIB. Over the next 3 days, you'll hear some fabulous speakers from approved housing bodies, from the large approved housing bodies to small approved housing bodies, from government departments, from the private sector. We are a very exciting time here in Ireland now. We have a new Minister for Housing and we have a new housing plan, Housing for All. In the last housing plan, the Irish Council for Social Housing members, of which there are 272, actively helped government deliver on their targets. And I have no doubt that in the new plan, Housing for All, that our members right the length and breadth of the country, whether they're small specialist providers in healthcare, disabilities, seniors, or whether they're large approved general housing bodies, or whether they're specialist homeless bodies like ourselves in the Trust. We will all play our part under the Irish Council for Social Housing banner to deliver on the targets for Housing for All. I hope you enjoy the next 3 days. I hope you get involved in the chat. Remember, have a goal every day. Look at the timetables. Look to see who's speaking. Look to see who you meant to connect with, who you want to connect with, whose ideas you'd like. Use the chat lines on the side of the conference to engage. You can get all the details, all the numbers from the Irish Council for Social Housing. There's a couple of people I want to thank in particular. I want to thank the Chief Executive, Donald McManus, and all the team in the Irish Council for Social Housing. They have supported the approved housing bodies right throughout the pandemic and have done amazing work to prepare for this conference today. I want to thank all our chairs of the sessions who have put themselves forward and who will guide us through the conference and make sure that your questions get to be asked. I want to thank our speakers for the preparation they've put in. We've got some great speakers who will be talking to us over the next few days. We have our opening address this morning from our Minister for Housing, Darragh O'Brien, and I want to thank the Minister for taking the time to speak to us today and to address us at the conference. But most of all, I want to thank you for engaging with us, for signing up for this, for sticking with the Irish Council for Social Housing through thick and thin. I hope you get everything you want from the conference today and over the next 3 days. And I want to thank you for choosing us. So on behalf of myself as President, Donald McManus, our CEO, all the team in the Irish Council for Social Housing, enjoy the next 3 days and get from it what you can. Thank you.
The Irish Council for Social Housing is the national social housing federation representing more than 250 housing associations across Ireland. Our member organisations, also known as approved housing bodies or AHBs, own and manage almost 45,000 homes and house about 100,000 people. ICSH members operate in every local authority area in the country and in over 500 communities across Ireland. The not-for-profit housing sector has a long and rich history, starting with philanthropic housing trusts in the 1870s. Dublin city centre contained some appalling slums, and in the 19th and early 20th century, our oldest member, the Ivy Trust, was founded in 1890 by Sir Edward Cecil Guinness, and the Trust continues to provide quality social rental housing in Dublin. From the 1930s to the 1950s, more than 50% of all new housing built in Ireland were social homes. However, substandard rental housing persisted, and during the 1980s the housing association sector began to grow, with the likes of Respond Housing catering initially for older people. The Irish Council for Social Housing, the ICSH, was established in 1982, and by the early 1980s more than 70 housing associations were registered, with a total stock of about 2,000 homes. In partnership with local authorities, approved housing bodies respond to a range of housing needs across the country and have a long-term commitment to the communities they operate in. Our members range from large organisations that operate across local authority areas to small associations that provide accommodation for their local communities. AHBs provide housing to families on low income and have a long history of providing housing for people who need accommodation with some element of support. This includes supported housing for older people, disabled people, or people leaving homelessness with complex needs. AHBs have a strong track record in providing innovative solutions to regenerate derelict schemes, complete unfinished developments, and unlock capacity within existing local authority stock. AHBs are working to provide older local authority tenants and property owners with an opportunity to move to purpose-built supported housing schemes adjacent to their communities, freeing up larger houses for families on the housing waiting list. AHB supported housing schemes help to build thriving communities that are safe, attractive and welcoming environments for older tenants that encourage and facilitate independent living within community for as long as possible. Many approved housing bodies are now pursuing mixed tenure and mixed income housing, such as affordable and cost rental housing for households that do not qualify for social housing. Quality housing is the bedrock of successful and sustainable communities. Our homes help us establish strong roots from which better health, educational and employment opportunities flow. Approved housing bodies invest in homes. Approved housing bodies invest in community.
Good morning. My name is Aideen Hayden and I'm chairing the first session of the conference. The title of this session is Housing for All, the Road Ahead, and I have with me to discuss that some of the most impressive people in social housing in Ireland. But first of all, we were going to be hearing an introduction from Minister Darragh O'Brien, who will be setting out the main principles of Housing for All. But after that, I think we will have a robust discussion and analysis, which is what we're hoping for in this session, where our speaker will be looking at the major themes of Housing for All and looking at the challenges that we're going to be facing in terms of delivery and affordability. Just to remind everybody that there is a chat function and to put up your questions for this session, but also bear in mind that we have a number of very exciting sessions over the next number of days dealing with all aspects of the programme, everything from the housing market to dealing with the needs of vulnerable social tenants and, sustainability, rights, everything. There is not a session where I don't think there's something for everybody. I'd just quickly like to introduce the people who are going to be featuring in this session. Minister Darragh O'Brien will be known to all of us. He was appointed Minister for Housing in June 2020. Before that, he was elected to the Dáil in 2007 for Fingal. And before that, he was a member of the Fingal local authority. He has always had a keen interest in housing and in particularly a keen interest in pyrite and the impacts of pyrite on housing and also, I suppose, some of the disasters of the previous crash in terms of the quality of housing. Responding to his presentation will be Seán O'Connor, whom you all know. He's CEO of Tuath. Tuath Housing is one of the largest and fastest growing housing associations in Ireland, with over 7,500 social homes that it manages. Seán himself is a chartered surveyor, but he's had over 30 years experience working in social housing in local authorities and housing associations, both here and in the UK. He's been involved in several award-winning housing schemes, and I think we're very confident that Seán will have a very robust analysis of Housing for All. After Seán, we'll be having Tom Gilligan, who's Director of Services in Mayo County Council. He's the Director of Services there with responsibility for housing. They manage under his leadership 2,500 units. I think maybe he's best known for his campaigns on vacant homes. He's been very strong on the capacity in Ireland here to utilise vacant and empty housing. And to add to his numerous talents, he's recently published his first book, Irish Drummers Volume 1, Tom. So well done on that. Responding then also from the developer sector, Tom, of course, will give us the local authority view, and Seán will give us the AHB perspective. Pat will give us the developer perspective. Pat Power is the Executive Director of Harcourt Developments, probably best known here for Park West, Dublin, and the Cool Dune and Parklands developments, where there will be over 1,200 units delivered. And among those units, there will be senior living units for Fold Ireland and one of the first cost rental units for Tuath Housing. So all in all, I think we have a very good lineup of people well capable of responding to the challenges of housing for all. So without further ado, I'd like to thank the Minister and indeed everybody who's put this conference together, including, as Pat mentioned, the funders, AIB, for their support. It's always nice to have open access to a conference, and without funders, that's not usually possible. So as I said, many, many thanks indeed to everybody who's put this together and to the speakers who will be with us today to give us the benefit of their experience. Thank you also to the Minister for putting forward his presentation for this conference.
Díomh go léir Darragh O'Brien an seo agus gur míle agah as an cura leabhart live inniu ar an códáil. All of you will be aware of the importance that this government is placing on improving our supply of housing. It is, put simply, the #1 priority of the government in the post-pandemic environment. Housing for All is the most comprehensive housing plan ever published in the history of the state, and it's backed with unprecedented financial commitments of over €4 billion per annum, almost double the outlay of recent investment. The plan is ambitious in its scope, but that's necessary. One of the biggest challenges facing our citizens deserves to have an ambitious response, and ensuring the successful implementation of Housing for All will be an absolute priority for me and the government. AHBs, in collaboration with local authorities, will be absolutely central to the delivery of this public housing, and it's critical that we work together to take all of the necessary measures to ensure the successful implementation of this plan. Last week, I met with the chief executives and directors of service of all the local authorities in the country, and I took the opportunity to underline the need for enhanced collaboration moving forward. Indeed, under Housing for all local authorities will be required to submit housing delivery action plans, which, amongst other things, they will outline the blend of delivery intended for each county, including how AHB delivery will be incorporated in each area. This will therefore require, from the outset of planning, a close working relationship between local authorities and approved housing bodies. And I have been working hard since coming into office to foster this approach through groups I've established, such as the high-level housing delivery group, which of course has representatives from the highest levels across both sectors. It's important to note we're not starting from scratch. In fact, over the past year, and in spite of the challenges presented by COVID, the groundwork has been laid for delivery through a series of really ambitious actions. Many of these have been significant and will have a lasting, meaningful impact on the housing system in Ireland. The introduction of the Comprehensive Affordable Housing Act, the first affordable piece of legislation, the most comprehensive ever published. The establishment of the Land Development Agency, placing it on a legislative statutory footing. Strengthened legislation for renters and banning co-living. Really significantly, the opening of the first ever cost rental units in the history of the state, been talked about for a long time, now delivered. And the signing of the Lisbon Declaration on ending homelessness by 2030. However, we all know there is significant work to be done, and effective delivery will be absolutely critical to the success of this plan. The role of approved housing bodies in the delivery of public and social housing has been enhanced over the past decade. This will continue under Housing for All and has been expanded to include the delivery of cost rental homes. As the sector meets the challenges of statutory regulation, it's an opportune time to consider the opportunities that may present. As AHBs continue to provide a range of housing and broader care and supports for a wide range of citizens, my department will support the sector, along with the ICSH, as it innovates to implement new models of organisation, collaboration and management. I'd encourage you in the sector to look inwardly too when planning for the future, to become more self-sufficient and to consider options such as group structures, partnering with other like-minded organisations in the area, perhaps of housing stock transfer. My department will review the structure and operation of CAF to assess whether any refinements to the facility are required so as to support the delivery of social housing by the AHB sector across a wider range of local authorities. The review will be commenced very, very shortly, and the successful role of voluntary regulation of AHBs is well on its way to transitioning towards the statutory regulation. As many of you here today are aware, the approved Housing Bodies Regulatory Authority has formally been established earlier this year, and this marked an important step for the sector. The new body will oversee the effective governance, financial management and performance of all voluntary and cooperative housing bodies. And Susanna Lyons, who I appointed as Chief Executive last year, will be speaking to you later this afternoon. And Susanna and her team, they've really hit the ground running and are doing an excellent job guiding and supporting your sector during this period of transition. I really want to take this opportunity to highlight one of the main functions of the regulator, if I may, which is to draft standards by which AHBs will be assessed. These standards will cover matters relating to corporate governance, financial management and reporting, property and asset management, and indeed tenancy management. In June of this year, I signed a commencement order to allow for the regulator to begin drafting standards. This process is underway and the regulator has been engaging with a range of key stakeholders as part of the process. The draft standards are due to be published at the end of September, with the 28-day representation period taking place during October. I do believe that this presents a great opportunity for stakeholders to get involved and have their say on what the standards should actually look like. The regulator will be holding a series of webinars alongside the publication of the standards, and I'd strongly encourage all AHBs to get involved and participate in these events. Perhaps one of the most significant new initiatives in Housing for All, in particular for the AHB sector, is the implementation of a new cost rental sector. The approved housing bodies are playing a vital role in the development of housing under this new model through your involvement in our new cost rental equity loan, or CREL scheme, to which 35 million was allocated in budget 2021. I'm really so delighted to see that the enthusiasm of the AHBs for this new type of housing has already led to the delivery of Ireland's first 25 cost rental homes at Taylor's Hill, Balbriggan by Tuath. And we followed very shortly now by the delivery of 50 new apartments at Stepaside by Tuath and Respond. Reading through Housing for All, I am sure you'll see lots of evidence of the fingerprints of the AHB sector, as we've been keen throughout to listen to you and to engage and harness the learning gained from the extraordinary growth in delivery in this sector over recent years. I very much look forward to continuing working closely with you and with all of you as we commence the next phase of delivery over these crucial coming years.
Well, thank you very much there to the Minister for setting out the main themes of Housing for All. I think it's worth noting, though, that the AHB sector exceeded its targets under Rebuilding Ireland by 50%. And if anything, over the period of the last plan, we've certainly seen a lot of collaboration between the AHB sector and the local authority sector, and indeed developers in general, in terms of delivering under the previous programme. So I suppose we'll be moving on now, first of all, with Seán. And I suppose we'll be looking at some of the challenging targets set out under Housing for All. Again, I think it's worth noting, Seán, you might have a view on this, that if you take into account the 10,000 social homes and the 6,000 cost rental and affordable, that out of a national delivery of roughly 33,000 a year, the state directly, and then on top of that indirectly, will be in, I suppose, the driving seat for almost 50% or more than 50% of the market. So without further ado now, I'd like to hand over to Seán O'Connor to give us his read on Housing for All and its main implications. Thank you, Seán.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the Irish Council for inviting me to speak at today's important event. And also want to thank AIB, I don't want to forget about them, for sponsoring the event and for lending Tuath a few bob over recent years. So thank you for that, and hello, everyone. Look, Tuath welcomes this plan, and particularly the determination in it to increase supply. And I also particularly welcome an acknowledgement that there are deeply embedded structural shortcomings and obstacles which we need to overcome to alleviate and eliminate this housing crisis. In the plan itself, I welcome renewed attention on demographics, on spatial strategy matters, and particularly on climate action. And I really welcome the upping of the ante in recognition of the seriousness of the problem we face. And we welcome the move to longer term joined up thinking, hopefully coupled with closer collaboration between the state and all divisions of the state and the public and private sector. So in this first slide, I'm not going to talk any more about this slide. In the next slide, I want to say that one of the key tenets of this is a determination to deliver cost rental. So there's three schemes here, and this is just like, I suppose, cost rental in action. So the top left has been referred to and referenced a lot. It's Enniskerry Road. What I just want to say about that is, we had 1,000 applications through Daft in a short window of 5 days for those apartments, which will rent at £1,200 per calendar month, nearly 50% off the open market rate. Hopefully we'll get those over the line. And I want to thank Respond, our partners on that, and Dunleary and Rafdan. We're looking forward to getting those people handing the keys over. The scheme on the bottom is Kilcarbery and Clondalkin, which will deliver 74 1 and 2 bed apartments next year. The majority of them are 2 beds. They're coming in at an average cost of 285,000 per unit, and we are achieving a very competitive rent. The scheme on the top right, and there's one of the panelists, Pat Power, that's in City West, and it's 44 2-bed apartments. And again, we're looking forward to the day when those are handed over to people. Both of these schemes, the last two I mentioned, have benefited from crowdfunding at 30% through the new loan mechanism. Enniskerry Road didn't receive crowd nor CAF, but it did receive service site funding, which was very welcome. And I want to thank the HFA, who's the funder on all three of these schemes, and we look forward to hopefully doing more business with the LDA. What I would say at this conjecture is that, to me, there's some myths we need to deal with in the whole debate about housing. And we're very excited by these developments, but I think we just need to temper that with some realities that we don't control everything, therefore. So the next slide is a wee bit of a puzzle. And if we were all here in person this morning, I'd be asking the audience, for your guesses. But there's a wee clue in this, that the fish is actually depicting a red herring, and the equation on the right relates to elasticity of demand. Now you're probably thinking, that doesn't help me in any way whatsoever. So hopefully the next slide will help explain my thinking. So the effect of increasing housing supply on reducing or softening prices in the past, as these two graphs demonstrate, has proven to be a complete red herring. The definition of a red herring is something that misleads or distracts from a relevant or important question. It may be a logical fallacy, or a literary device that leads readers or audiences towards a false conclusion. Elasticity of demand, the equation is a measure of how sensitive the quantity demanded is to its price. When the price rises, quantity demanded falls for almost any good or item. So I just want to say this fallacy is, I sort of taken root, and it's just important because for me, increasing supply will not be enough. That elasticity of demand equation probably does apply to lots of things, but it doesn't apparently apply to housing. And it's not just Ireland what's unique at that, it defies gravity. And one of the most astonishing things in the pandemic has been the accelerated growth of house prices around the world, not just Ireland, because everyone thought the opposite was going to happen. So housing has its own peculiarities, and it doesn't behave in the normal expectations of what economists believe it's going to behave. And I think we need to remember that. So for me, what's important about this is that increasing supply on its own is not enough. Affordability has to be improved, as the next slide shows. So the broken line on the bottom is earnings, and all the other lines are house prices in different parts of the country. But basically, what they show, both the house prices versus earnings growth and the rent versus earnings growth, is that there is a very substantial gap on affordability. And those charts end in 2019. And if they went on to current day, it would probably look even worse. The gap would be even bigger. So whilst the plan is right to focus on increasing supply, for me, it's true measure of success whether it also delivers improved affordability. And that's really true for young and old, and for the sake of our society as a whole. We need to close this affordability gap, and we need to give people, particularly young people, hope that is going to be closed. And the next slide just demonstrates for many what this affordability dilemma looks like. I mean, for many people today, and particularly young people, it's not possible to secure a mortgage despite it being cheaper due to central bank rules on loan to value and income multipliers. It's almost cruel in a certain way that, and I hear a lot of young people talking about this, and we may say, and when I say we, I say many of us are probably comfortable homeowners, so we don't have this dilemma, that it's maybe for their own good, to contain themselves, save a bit more, and, but is it really for their own good to become a rent slave and effectively not be able to break out of that? Nothing wrong with renting, and we've all done it, but where's the future for people? And I would be hopeful that the central bank will fix this in their review, which is underway at the moment. But in the meantime, we have to welcome measures by the state, the LDA and local authorities to help people into home ownership. So we do welcome that. But in the next slide, if we can put that up, and a few after, I just want to highlight very quickly some key challenges which may arise, because I was being too positive up to this point. I'm not generally a positive person, so I'll revert to kind now, but there are challenges in this, and some within our own remit to influence, and others are outside our control. I mean, and basically you can call them events. So a current event is that inflation has hit a 10-year high in the Eurozone, very rapid increase. Many commentators believe it will ease next year and the year after, but equally, there are many who don't share this view. So construction appears particularly prone to price increases, and we're seeing that now with real tender prices. So worryingly, inflation will mean less bang for our buck if it takes root. The $4 billion a year budgeted in the plan could well be eroded in real monetary terms if inflation assumptions are out. And additionally, it could negatively impact on the well-intentioned move to curb private sector rents. The move in rent pressure zones from a a fixed cap to capping rents at inflation could prove in the short term not to be beneficial to people, but we'll see. But hopefully the government can react if that's the case. And just to move on from inflation, usually the consequences of inflationary pressures is that it leads to higher interest rates. And we're not in control of interest rates in Ireland. So, Eurozone interest rates, they go up for everyone. If interest rates go up, it will, of course, disimprove affordability in the short term. But in saying that, so one thing, we need to try and ensure that the measures to increase supply don't lead to inflationary pressures and costs being passed on to purchasers and renters. But in reality, higher rates may actually be what is required to take the steam out of the market in lower prices, both in capital and rental prices long term. I'm nearly finished, and if just the next slide is something. What I just wanted to say is an interesting picture. It's Michael Collins about to throw the slips in 1921. It's a 100-year-old photograph, and it strikes me that there's a lot of actors in the field, and competition's good. There's a lot of state actors, but what's really crucial is that we continue to collaborate and work in close partnership. That we treat this as a common goal, almost on a war footing. And that the sector has always been a conduit between the public and private sectors. I would encourage all stakeholders to continue to see the sector. And you won't find AHB wanting, AHB's wanting in terms of partnership and collaboration. I'm on to my penultimate slide next. And there's some random pictures on this, but really this is another. The last few things I've been talking about, some of we can possibly control and the others, the previous slide we could. This one we can control to a degree, but there are also events outside our control, such as the giant container ship, the Evergreen, ever stuck in the Suez Canal, which of course people are still dining out on with price rises. So Santa's toy Sacabidera because they were stuck in the Suez Canal. But what it did, it sent alarm bells ringing around the world about the fragility of the global supply chain. And Ireland, of course, a small island sitting on the western fringe of Europe, and we don't make much stuff. So it should be a worry for us. And what it effectively does, it's but another item here is about skills shortage. Here's something we can control. Okay, so I applaud the measures in the plan to bring apprentices through the system. We need more people. But I would also, and Tuath intends to sponsor such initiatives as much as we can through a foundation program we're looking at establishing. But one thing I think we really need to up is the game on off-site manufacturing. Now that development on the right is a Tuath development, Castleguard in RD. And it was a partnership with Modern Homes Ireland. 90% of those homes were made in the factory. There are 102 homes, the majority of them are 3-bed houses. It was on site 11 months, very quickly went up. The cost was 22 million. It's only a couple of years ago, working out at 217,000 on average a home. We're very happy with the quality, how quick it went up, quality of the build. It's one of 5 projects we've done with Modern Homes on. That's their factory on the top left. It's not an advert for them. But what I'm saying, I think we really need to see the game up on off-site manufacturing. It's greener and it's quicker, and possibly in the future there can be incentives, financial incentives, to encourage more off-site manufacturing and the establishment of factories. So just want to move on to my last slide, but just before I say that, the Evergreen slide, if I could just ask the Stephen, to just go back one minute, just to remind you of the container ship. That evergreen slide, ironically, was in the Suez Canal, right? And it highlights this issue about events. And a former British Prime Minister, Anthony Eden, was done for with the Suez Canal debacle. And it's odd how these synergies come about. And his predecessor, Harold Macmillan, was done for by the Profumo affair. And he coined the phrase, basically, which was events, when he was asked about, well, you know, they did not see these coming, you know, what can happen in circumstances? And he basically said, events, dear boys, events, meaning we have to be ever alert to things which can come out of nowhere, such as the COVID crisis. So just to finish up, I just want to go back to where I started. So on my very last slide, the plan, I'm sure, is going to up output. And that's the main focus of my presentation here has been about supply, because that's what TUA is about. It's about increasing supply. It's about increasing output. And we have done that for the last number of years. But increasingly importantly, TUA and all AHBs are about affordability. And that's what I would like to see all the stakeholders concentrating on. It's not just about delivering supply. If it's not affordable, it's not worth the damn for most people. We've got to get affordability back into the system. So that's my presentation. I thank you for that, and good luck to the other speakers now this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seán. Thank you very much. You raised a number of issues there now that I think we'll be coming back to. Certainly, I think your slide that says, you know, supply and affordability do not go hand in hand. You know, we're looking at an ask of 33,000 units a year. In 2006, we delivered over 90,000. And we still had major affordability issues. So, you know, yeah, let's not go down that rabbit hole again. So we need to kind of be really careful. And I think your point about supply is only useful if it leads to affordability is a really key point. And again, I suspect we'll be coming back to this in other areas. You know, what could derail housing for all? And the evergreen thing, you know, just as an aside, I'm sure we've all got these emails from suppliers telling us, book now, get it now, you won't be ready for Christmas because there's supply chain issues. But there are real supply chain issues in the construction sector. As I understand it, timber prices have gone up by 40 to 50%. So you're looking at, even if you change to alternate construction methods, significant increases in costs that could cause real derailment in terms of, you know, cost structures. But again, thanks a million, Seán. That was very thought-provoking. We're going to move on to Tom now, and Tom will be giving us the perspective from the local authorities. But just to say, Tom, as well as your Mayo experience, you've also had Limerick City and County experience as well as your vacant homes, I suppose, hat. So just looking at, I mean, Housing for All has a very strong and very clear road for local authorities. So I'd be very interested to hear how you see that is going to pan out for the local authority sector. So I'm handing you over to Tom now.
Thanks, Aideen, and thanks everyone. And just to say good morning, and it's an absolute privilege and pleasure to be presenting to you today. And I want to thank the Council for Social Housing for giving me the opportunity. So as Aideen outlined, my presentation is going to be based on obviously the Housing for All, the road ahead, but how it deals specifically, I suppose, and elements of that relate specifically to local authorities going forward. So we all know, I suppose, the Housing for All plan, it sets out a key role for local authorities in helping to solve the housing crisis. The plan contains 213 actions, and local authorities are directly involved in 38 of those actions, obviously in partnership, apart from leading solely as the lead authority, but working in partnership and collaboration with a number of agencies, including approved housing bodies, including the department and several state agencies as well. So it's a very exciting role that local authorities have in relation to the whole Housing for All plan. So, but as Seán outlined as well, I suppose there are a number of current challenges that we're facing, and I suppose be very mindful of the current environment that we're all working within. Obviously, COVID-19 has had such a significant and seismic change in relation to the way we do business and the way we deliver services as well. Also in relation to Brexit, probably not talked about as much, but still in relation to areas such as supply and cost, etc., that's having an impact. And I also mentioned in relation to the lack of resources, and specifically around the labour shortage, which we have at the moment in relation to skills shortage. And this isn't just local authorities, it's other bodies and other agencies as well. But the plan does outline, I suppose, a progressive element in relation to that, for the recruiting of skilled workers of 37,500 going forward, which is to be welcomed. So in relation to the pathways, and we all know the 4 pathways, pathway 1 for local authorities in relation to the whole thing of supporting home ownership, and the new local authority-led affordable purchase scheme. And we've recently seen the introduction of the Affordable Housing Act 2021, and the whole area there where local authorities in relation to specifically, I suppose, taking an equity share in a house in a new build. And that is something in a sense that is new, it's innovative, it's something that we're very much looking forward to implementing, and we're going to see how that applies to the local authorities. It's probably fair to say it will probably impact some local authorities more than others, particularly in relation to the larger cities and urban areas. On the second element there, the increased contribution under Part 5, currently in relation from 10%, now that will be increased to 20% to take account of areas such as affordability and cost rental. And that is something, I suppose, which is very much welcomed in the plan. And it highlights in relation to, apart from social housing, this new element of affordability and cost rental is going to become very much to the fore going forward. And then the newly expanded local authority home loan, which has increased the limit up to 65,000, but also from the 10th of September, we saw the reduction of the interest rate by 0.25%. So that's going to be interesting. And so the one key element on that, although it makes the loan more attractive, but it doesn't, in a sense, increase supply of housing directly. That's something I suppose that we're going to have to work with going forward. On the second pathway, dealing with homelessness, and this is obviously a key area for local authorities and in relation to the increase in the social housing delivery. But each local authority by the end of December and quarter 4 has to produce or prepare a housing delivery action plan. And that plan will involve specifically around the social and affordable housing element. So that's something that each local authority will be doing now that it has received its own individual social housing targets going forward. So here in Mayo County Council, we will be working very closely with our Strategic Policy Committee on that, and with the members in relation to the delivering of our action plan. And also a key element as well is how local authorities need to consider the housing needs of older people through the housing demand needs assessment framework. And that is something very, very important. We're seeing our population getting older, and we have to deal with those opportunities and challenges as they arise. Make improvements in the quality and quantity of traveller-specific accommodation, also very welcomed as well, and certainly something that local authorities will embrace. And be mindful of the fact as well that we're, apart from a national economy, we're also living in a global environment, and local authorities will agree a national spatial distribution for the accommodation of 2,900 refugees under the IRPP programme. And we're seeing that, I suppose, in relation to Syrian refugees and obviously in Afghan refugees as well. So this is something that we certainly will be working with and ensuring that these people get a new fresh start, a new beginning going forward, and that they're given every opportunity to provide to society. On the third one, in relation to the increasing new housing supply, the introduction of new urban development zones, In local authorities, I suppose we're very mindful of the strategic development zones, but these are new urban development zones which are specifically targeted in relation to increasing the housing supply in our towns and cities. So this is going to be something very attractive and something we're going to be very mindful of and working to ensure that we can deliver. And also in relation to the state to support local authorities by facilitating for the land acquisition. And apart from the shortage in labour, but there's also in some local authorities there's an acute shortage of land and suitable land and zone land for housing. And so that's something that is very much welcomed. And finally, I suppose on this pathway is the overall and simplified planning legislation to ensure certainty and stability. And that is something I think which is very much welcomed, is the whole area of planning, and that we can look at simplifying it in order to ensure that we have the stability going forward. I suppose in Ireland in the past, we've been guilty of the boom and bust cycle. So now, in a sense, if we can bring certainty and continuity, I think that is something that is very much welcomed by not just local authorities, but all sectors involved in housing delivery. On the fourth one, and Aideen has already mentioned, I mean, this is probably, in a sense, my favourite pathway per se, because I have a huge interest and passion in the whole area of vacant homes and utilising existing stock. And it was very mindful of the fact that the former plan, the Rebuilding Ireland Action Plan for Housing and Homelessness, identified utilising existing stock as a key pillar, and it was pillar 5. But at times I felt it was probably the forgotten child of the whole Rebuilding Ireland plan. But I delighted to see that in the new Housing for All plan, that it's mentioned as a key pathway, and that whole thing of vacancy and efficient use of stock. I mean, it's something which I'm very mindful of, because apart from the whole thing of increasing housing and utilizing our stock, we are helping to deal with areas such as, to aspects of dereliction. We're helping to rejuvenate areas that are in decline. And it's so important, I think, not only just from a physical aspect of it, but produce housing, but from a mental aspect as well, because people living beside derelict sites or vacant buildings or utilized, it is such an economic and I think mental well-being impact on people as well. So this is something which I'm very excited about to see this in the Housing for All plan, and the whole area here of supporting local authorities to purchase and resell up to 2,500 vacant properties. For the open market, and that is very much welcomed. The new Cree Connaughta Fund for servicing sites, and that's in relation to planning permissions and reactivating planning permissions as well, that we can introduce new density into housing, and there's a significant fund of $500 million outlined for that. And also in relation to our own stock, and this is around the whole thing of our own management and maintenance of housing stock. We're seeing this in relation to energy efficiency, energy ratings as well, and heating of housing, which is something that we're very mindful of, because it is something that impacts on tenants on an annual basis, and we need to be ensure that our own stock is brought up to a certain energy efficient rating, and that it is fit for purpose going forward. So there are other aspects in relation to the plan as well, which have a key impact on the way we do business here in Mayo and other local authorities. And elements of that is the reform of the differential rents. Obviously, there's such a wide comparison, I suppose, such a wide difference between local authorities, that there is a proposal now to reform the differential rents going forward, which is to be welcomed. Also, the tenant purchase scheme, aspects of that is going to be looked at as well, and gives, where people have had tenants an opportunity to buy their own home, but looking at that as well in relation to the rates and the amount of tenant purchases going forward. The rollout of the choice-based letting. This is something which the plan is to have this in every local authority. I know some local authorities have adopted this and adopted very well, but the plan is that every local authority would deal with the whole area of choice-based letting. And finally, I suppose the review and reform of income eligibility. And this is something here in Mayo, I suppose, which comes up a significant amount in our council chamber. It's something which the members have a keen interest in, because in relation to the income eligibility limits, they haven't been changed for a substantial number of years, 10 years or more. And, in relation to individuals and couples as well, working within the 27,500 and on the 30,000 income limits, it's very difficult for people. So I think it's welcome that there is a review and reform in relation to the whole income eligibility around social housing. So and I suppose Seán touched on this as well, but with every plan and with every strategy, there's a sort of a SWOT analysis that we do. And I've done, I suppose, particularly as focusing on the opportunities and threats around the whole Housing for All plan and how I envisage these opportunities and threats playing out. But the great opportunity here is that, working even more closely and collaborating with various agencies to increase housing supply. And that is something which is very welcomed. The threat on that, I suppose, is that there are other competing demands coming forward as well. We have other elements in relation to the National Development Plan, Project Ireland 2040. So there are other competing demands there that which will be aligning, competing with what we're trying to do for Housing for All. But it's important that we all work together and collaborate on that. I've mentioned the rejuvenation of our towns and villages, and that's particularly as regards the CPO process and around areas such as vacant homes. But one of the key things there is we don't want to see a delay in implementing legislation, and that's particularly around, specifically if I mentioned the vacant home tax, which has been muted and is something which the government have committed to. Now, I know that people will be making returns as part of the local property tax, but it's very important, I think, and I believe that a local property tax is introduced, because it is something that I think will help. And we've seen the impact that it's had worldwide, where local property tax, vacant home tax has been introduced, and where it is helping to rejuvenate the market going forward. Energy efficiencies I've already outlined. But one thing which we need to be mindful of is when we're building these 300,000 new homes, is the carbon footprint that we're leaving on supply. And this is why, specifically, I suppose I'm very passionate about the whole thing of utilising existing stock of vacant homes, is that a lot of the key infrastructure is already in place. So, for example, you have your roads, you have your footpaths, you have your utilities already there servicing that site. So we need to be mindful, we're working in an area where climate change is one of the key priorities as well going forward, not just for local authorities, but for every sector as well. So the carbon footprint, and we need to look at ways in order to mitigate and adapt in relation to that. Workforce upskilling. This is something which is very, very acute, I think, as regards, we need more skilled workers. We need more plumbers, tradespeople. We need carpenters, etc. But also we have competing sectors. We have, there are new data centers being built, new hospitals, new schools. So there are competing sectors for that limited pool. So we must make sure that there's enough skilled tradespeople around in order to deliver the housing going forward. And also in relation to increased investment. The Housing for All plan makes significant, Seán mentioned, in relation to the 40 billion, which is welcome. But also we need to mind here that there's not a delay in infrastructure. So for example, and I'm not singling these out, but for example, in relation to Irish Water, that there are enough, and the treatment plants that we have in various towns, that they need to be upgraded in order to account and be aware of the increase in demand going forward when we are building new communities and new housing throughout the country. So just two specific things I just want to mention. So this is what it's all about at the end of the day. This is what brings me, I suppose, the greatest joy, is when you hand over keys to either an individual who's been homeless, to a young couple who are starting out. But it's the whole thing of the finished product and what people get. So this is an example in relation to a repair and lease scheme. I'm delighted to see as well that the new changes as regards to the scheme that has been increased from 40 up to 60,000. And this is, so when people move into their new home, the excitement that's given from that. Also in relation to the buy and renew here, an example of a premises in Westport that was very, very much derelict and run down and underutilized, and has been brought back into use. And that is now, I suppose, in a sense, providing a new home and a fresh start for someone as well. So you're very much welcomed. So in summary, and I just want to finish up on this, there's a significant role for local authorities in the new Housing for All plan. There's a lot of actions there, as I mentioned, 213. We're involved specifically in 38 of those, but there's other elements as well that we will have a key role. And it's something, I think it's an opportunity now for all the sectors, local authorities, approved housing bodies, the department, and Irish Water to work together and collaborate together to ensure that we're all driving forward to ensure that the success of this plan. And the great thing about it, with meeting recently with the housing minister, and he outlined this, was the whole of government approach. So it's not just housing. We have in relation to deeper, we have climate change, we have transport, we have tourism. Everyone is behind this program. And that's the important thing as well, that it has the funding, it has the will and determination in order to get it to see it succeed. And finally, I suppose, and this is important, that we're hearing this every day, that housing is the number one priority. So here in Mayo, it certainly is our priority, and we have other issues as well. I mean, other priorities would be climate change and economic development, but housing is the key priority here, and we want to make sure that we can deliver on our targets to ensure that a county like Mayo is a better place for people to come, live, visit, and invest in. So I want to thank you all today so much for the opportunity to speak to you, and thank you, and I say enjoy the rest of the days. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tom. I noticed a couple of old chestnuts in there, the differential rental scheme, yet again, reviewing the tenant purchase scheme, yet again. So I suppose we'll have to wait and see. But I definitely, in terms of the dereliction and death of our towns and villages, I think anybody who's traveled around the country over the last, 2 years will see that there has been major dereliction in some of our towns and villages that needs to be addressed. So it is a huge challenge. I'm going to rapidly move on here now to Pat. Just to mention, Harcourt developments, as I said at the introduction, are not just one of the most significant developers of housing in Dublin and in Ireland, but also, they're very key developers in other areas in the UK, for example, and in Northern Ireland. And have been involved both in cost rental and in delivering housing for senior members of our community. So without further ado, Pat, I'll hand over to you. I've just given you a little warning that we do want to leave a bit of time for questions at the end. So not asking you to speed through, but, give us there's a few questions in, so I want to give it a bit of time.
Many thanks, Aideen. Yes, I will be short and brief, and appreciate the time. My name is Pat Power. I'm a director at Harcourt Developments, and I would like to thank the Irish Council for Social Housing for asking me to participate in this prestigious event, especially as it's focusing on the latest government publication of Housing for All. I was asked to comment on Housing for All from a developer's point of view and the road ahead. The Housing for All initiative is an all-encompassing document, and when followed through will deliver the basic human need, with everyone in the state having access to a home to purchase or rent at an affordable price, built to a high standard and in the right place, offering a high quality of life. From a developer's point of view, I would like to take the production of housing back to base principles. A developer is often used as a broad brush term with certain connotations. In real terms, a developer is a manufacturer. Exactly what it says there, we produce homes. In simple terms, the developer assembles the ingredients and manages the production process. So once a site or land is identified, we need to put together and assemble the main ingredients. And the main ingredients in the production of residential units are planning, infrastructure, labour, materials, expertise, experience, and all the professionals. And of course, what brings all of that together then is capital. Now, as mentioned previously by Seán and Tom and others there, that it's really all down to everyone has a role and responsibility in this journey. In relation to the responsibility, like planning and infrastructure, probably mainly, not solely, but mainly falls to the public sector. It was mentioned about utilities and various other aspects as well. From a developer's point of view, i.e. the manufacturer, if I use that analogy again, our job is to assemble and the labour, the materials, use the expertise, bring in the various professionals to try and produce the homes that that's required. And of course, both public and the private sector are responsible for providing the capital. Everyone has a role to play in the production line, both the public and the private sector, and the interwoven role of both the public and private sector is vital for the successful implementation and to achieve the magnitude of homes required under the Housing for All initiative. And with that, the result is the production of residential units. I was asked, is there challenges to this and to achieving the results that are set out? Of course, there's challenges, many challenges, but just wanted to focus on a few. Probably the most referenced one is the capacity. I'm not sure that capacity is the biggest challenge. I think it's not an unsurmountable one. The output numbers are realistic. The construction industry is a resilient industry, and despite the pandemic, will produce approximately 20,000 residential units this year. This is expected to rise to over 25,000 next year, 2022, and increase to over 30, maybe 35,000 residential units on a per annum basis in the next 2 to 3 years. One must remember in the early to mid 2000s, 60 to 80,000 residential units were produced on a per annum basis, reaching to almost 90,000 residential units completed in 2007. So capacity, well, it's probably the one respective materials, labour, it is achievable and has been achieved in the past. The one I would like to focus on as the real challenge is really cost is greater than value in certain locations. Coming back to my analogy of manufacturing, we always say when your outgoings exceed your income, your upkeep could be your downfall. But the cost of producing a home in certain areas is greater than the completed value or sale price. So what happens? Production stops, houses don't get produced. And that's what we're actually living with, the product of that over the last decade or so. In other words, the manufacturing and the production line stopped, and that's just basic commerce. For example, outside the greater Dublin area, this is where the issue is mainly, where it costs more to produce what the unit is worth. And also from an owner-occupier of apartments in Dublin, especially in suburban locations, this is also a phenomenon that's seen. Now, if the Housing for All is to work on a cost basis, it is inevitable that there will be the production of units, and the additional type of homes gets produced in the locations that need it most at an affordable price and at an affordable rent. So therefore, if we see the imbalance of the value being less than cost, the real output here is going to be the benefit will outweigh the cost if the cost of production is covered. And that, in my opinion, will lead to the sustainable and viable production of affordable homes, what is expected from the Housing for All programme. So what is the solution? Well, we have the Urban Regeneration Development Fund. Tom referred to earlier there the Cree Conatee. I suppose for those of you in Osberla, the residential heart, there is a lot of towns and cities outside Dublin where the centre of the town has all the facilities referred to, like the infrastructure, but it costs more to produce the units. And if this actually works in terms of bridging the vital bridge of the viability challenge for the type of units in the locations I refer to. Units will get produced. If costs are covered, units will get produced. I suppose just to conclude, conscious of time, the main thing is the whole collaboration. Developers are manufacturers of homes and have a vital role to play in producing homes for all. And the collaboration of all the local authorities, the approved housing bodies, the local development agency, or the land development agency, should I say, the housing finance agency and developers, we all need to work together. Why? Because we each have a vital part to play in the production of sustainable, viable and affordable homes to either rent or buy. One final point in our experience is that early engagement with the approved housing bodies really works well, and they have been to the forefront in the delivery of social and affordable houses for many years. We have done some senior living ones with Fold. We're converting some buildings for Tuath housing. We're also doing one of the first pilot schemes for the cost rentals with Tuath also. So it does work, but outside Dublin and in areas where we need owner-occupier apartments, it's how the subvention will work in order to get what the basic need is, to get everybody a home and on that ladder, be it renting, owning or shared ownership. To keep it brief as asked, I just have to say many thanks for inviting me to participate, but look forward to moving together to making this work collaboratively.
Thank you.
Stop share.
3 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Pat. We have, I think, 8 minutes left before the end of this session, and we'll be moving directly on to the outlook for the Irish housing market, just to let everybody know, which I think would be a very interesting session. Just in terms of what you were saying there, Pat, I suppose the question that was in my mind is there enough in this strategy to get over the high cost of apartment developments, which is going to impact on whether or not it's an option for, you know, I suppose, first-time buyers going forward, or even owner-occupiers going forward. But look, I have a couple of questions from the audience, and I have one in particular I think encapsulates a lot of, you know, what we'd kind of like to find out from you. And the question is very simple, and I'm going to give you all like 2 minutes to respond, 2 minutes max. So like I'm giving you a minute. What do the panel think the biggest strengths of housing for all are, and the biggest weaknesses? Now, I'm going to add one little caveat to that and ask you, if there was one thing that you would put into housing for all that isn't there, what would it be? So, okay, I'm going to start with you, Tom. You're on the clock. 1 and a little bit of a minute.
Okay, thanks, Aideen. I think one of the biggest strengths is in relation to the funding and the committed funding that's behind this. It's not just a plan with words. There's funding there behind it in order to ensure that it's going to be delivered. And also as well, I think one of the strengths around the plan is the fact that it's looking at various things in relation to housing. So it's working, I suppose, it's an all of government approach. And that is something which I think is very, very strong around that. And that's something that the Minister has alluded to as well. It's not just housing, but it's the elements in relation to climate change, in relation to transportation, in relation to working collaboratively with other organisations as well. The weaknesses, I kind of mentioned this already. So the weaknesses is how are we going to ensure that there are not other competing demands in relation to delivering of the Housing for All plan. You know, we need to make sure, I suppose, in the sense that housing is the priority and that it remains so. And also in relation to areas such as legislation. The plan outlines, I suppose, the delivery of certain areas, particularly I mentioned the vacant home tax, but we need legislation as well around that. And there's areas of legislation which has to be introduced. It's a detailed document. It's not voluminous, but the devil will be in the detail when we get the various circulars that come from the department, outlining specifically, I suppose, the actions and the roles that need to be delivered. So there are some elements that are still work in progress, as far as I can see. So that's kind of the strength and weakness.
And what would you like to have seen in there that isn't there?
Well, I think what I would like to see is I would like to see more elements around. I think in some elements the targets could have been greater. I do honestly think there could have been more ambition, particularly around the delivery of 2,500 vacant properties. I'd like to have seen that a little bit higher, and also in relation to the affordability piece. I suppose my concern is that the affordability piece will be focused on certain areas, and that maybe it won't be, not all of the country will benefit from that affordability piece until we see the further legislation around that as well. So that's what I would like to see.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks a million. Pat, you're up next. This is it
Thank
now.
you. Yeah,
tell
briefly.
The minister what you like, what you don't like, and what you wish he'd done.
No. Look, I think the strength here is that there seems to be a motivation from all departments in government, and I suppose, as Tom referred to, it seems to be a funded programme. And that's probably its main, that if we all work together, I wouldn't say a weakness, but the main important aspect here is decision making and the speed of decision making in relation to getting permits through, getting your planning through, and getting your utilities following suit. Because you're as good as the weakest link in relation to the production. So not necessarily a weakness, but more a threat. And I suppose, look, on a completely different note, there is a lot of things that have worked in the past. Capital allowances have worked in the past extensively, getting private money to actually produce. A lot of towns got urban renewal relief, which actually got towns rejuvenated in the 90s, and has worked, but yes, maybe politically not a thing to do. We do a lot in the UK. And there's no VAT on new residential units, and that 13.5% in this country is the difference between, if you say, affordability. So a £250,000 or euro home is actually it's really only 220,000. But effectively, if that VAT wasn't there, I think that's the one that definitely in the UK, like you just go an hour up the road, one side of Newry to Dundalk, there's a 13.5% difference in relation to the cost purely on that front.
So that's what should have been there. And finally, Seán, I know that in your presentation there's lots you would like to have said, I'm sure. So is there, what do you think the strengths and weaknesses, and what would you like to have seen that isn't there?
Okay, so biggest strength for me is it's an element, it almost feels a little bit confessional, that there's this commitment to tackle deeply embedded obstacles to delivery. And Pat and Tom mentioned some of those around infrastructure and planning. And housing needs to be seen as vital infrastructure, and I don't think it has been in the past. I think all speakers have shared that line of thought. So biggest strength, joined up long-term thinking, is clearly evident in the plan. The biggest weakness for me is probably a focus on supply without a commensurate focus on emphasising affordability. The one thing to change, I truly believe that, I applaud all the measures to bring more apprentices into the system, and it seems to me that we do, the country, need to incentivise more off-site manufacturing, the setting up of facilities. Maybe that can be through financial and taxation measures, but I do think the way forward is not necessarily through, training up more wet trades and the old trades. It's more about manufacturing off-site, quality control, greener building. So I would have liked to see more incentives, but maybe there's time and budgets to come for those things to be incentivised.
I'm counted down now. Our time is up. Could I just very, very quickly say thank you to Tom, thank you to Pat, thank you to Seán, and indeed thank you to the Minister. And I hope you all have a really good time with the rest of the programme, because it is a very exciting and interesting programme, and I think one that really meets the needs of our time. So thank you all very, very much.
Thanks.